This is TWiT.
From 404media.co, which is a company we know well and love. Some of their reporters are great. Cox Media Group, you know the name Cox, big cable provider, ISP, marketing company, is now telling their customers, the marketers, that they can target potential clients thanks to their active monitoring of voice devices.
Jesus.
I'll read the lead. A marketing team within media giants Cox Media Group claims it has the capability to listen to ambient conversations of consumers through embedded microphones in smartphones, smart TVs, and other devices to gather data and to use that data to target ads. This is in their marketing material. And from a pitch they gave to outside marketing professionals. They call it active listening. They claim the company,
which is what you should do. You learn this in therapy.
Right.
Active
I'm listening very intently.
So we should want this, right?
Yeah. Well, marketers want it. We know they want it. They want to know everything about you, right?
Yeah.
Can they do it? David, what do you think? Is this them blowing smoke? Well,
first of all, turning on your microphone, it's debatable whether you can or can't do it. And I believe both Android and Apple are claiming, they're not going to enable this. But at the same time, I'm sure everyone has had this experience where you had a conversation with someone and all of a sudden you're seeing ads for that thing that you just had a conversation, and you immediately assume, is my phone listening to me? Of which I know the Reply All podcast delved into this, and they claimed it's not. Usually what happens, and again, it may be happening, it may not, it's still up in the air, but usually what happens is, say you and I are friends on Facebook, and you start looking up the thing that we were talking about, then all of a sudden I may see it as well. So that may be the reason. But yes, marketers would love something like this. But yes, it is flies in the face of people's concerns of privacy. I should also mention people's concerns of privacy are fairly new. I remember 13 years ago, I heard Eric Schmidt speak at an event at I think it was the Four Seasons up in Lake Tahoe. And he said to a group of tech professionals, with great pride, he said, we can predict at a high rate where you are going to go next. And nobody screamed, hey, huge privacy concern. It was more like, hey, that's pretty darn cool.
Yeah.
It is only recently we're getting very, very concerned about privacy. And I believe the European regulation, GDPR, is really what brought it to the forefront, because after that, we now see more and more here in the United States. And also, Europeans are far more privacy conscious than we are here in the U.S.
All right, remember,
this
Cox
thing is huge.
Remember, Cox is a cable company. They offer phone service. They probably have cellular service. This came in to Steve Gibson. We talked about it on Security Now on Tuesday from a listener, Justin. He says, have you ever seen something like this? His cell carrier, which turns out to be Xfinity, is asking him to accept a root certificate on his phone and give it full trust.
What?
Now, obviously, Brianna, you know what the implication of that is. That puts a man in the middle on everything going on your smartphone.
Jeez.
Now, I don't have Xfinity cell phone service. Is this something that they do to every customer? Because if they
By the way,
do,
this is not the first example of this. There's many other examples of this as well. Exactly what you're describing, Brianna.
I'm just shocked. I mean, that's horrible. I mean, look, the answer to all of this is, look, I work in advertising, or at least I work with, as far as political advertising, I have conversations every single day with people about the data we want to collect, who we want to target, ways to do it, ways to reach them out there. Because cable TV is not working, so we've got to figure out how to micro-target with more people and specificity on the internet. So I see every day how broken this field is. And I feel like a broken record on this show, Leo, like believing there's going to be some moment where the lights are going to come on from the sky and people are going to understand that they shouldn't do this because it's wrong. That's not going to happen. And the ways this is probably getting targeted is through these bottom of the barrel smartphone games or apps that like have crappy permissions on Android, and they ask you to give wide access to your phone, and people probably say yes and they shouldn't, and get access to all your information that way. I have no doubt that's like what they're talking about here. And the only way forward is regulation. I'm sorry, I know no one in the tech industry wants to hear that, but there is just, show me a pragmatic way to get this garbage like from threatening our privacy, because it's going to keep getting worse and worse and worse if we don't do something.
Nate, you're in the UK, which has a very interesting attitude about this. The EU, of course, wants to protect consumers. The UK government has a very aggressive plans to spy on everything you do, right? The Snoopers Charter, and they want to break encryption.
Oh my God.
Yeah, they're not fans of end-to-end encryption because they believe that it enables predators and other illegal actors to do what they do. But they so far have not managed to make any actual encryption be broken because everyone is against it. So that's not happened. They do also like to spy, but they've done that for a long time. The controversial thing recently was, how do you prove that you are how do you prove that you are over 18 or over whatever legal age you need to be to access something? How about using AI to determine your age through a webcam or through a smartphone? Like that's the current thing we talked about on the podcast the other week, actually.
What could possibly go wrong?
Exactly. You don't need me to explain the reasons why that's such a terrible idea, but these are some of the suggestions that are made. And a lot of the time they do come from a position of generally, good intentions, protect kids, stop terrorism. But the reality is that you generally make things worse by cracking down on things that are actually predominantly used by good people for legitimate purposes. But in terms of the snooping and the advertising, I mean, for a long time, we've kind of felt like devices are spying on us. I think the regulation has a huge part to play, but I actually think that, not to sound like an Apple apologist or a fanboy, but one of the best things about Apple these days is Apple doesn't really need your data. It's evil in its own way. It wants you to buy, spend $1,000 on a phone every year and iPads and stuff, but it doesn't need your data in the same way that Google and others.
This is a very key point right there. Yes.
Yeah. And so I sort of
first-party data is what we're talking about versus third-party data.
The fact that Google operates, their revenue model is based on behavioral data. Apple's revenue model is not based on behavioral data.
Increasingly, though, Apple is doing advertising and is collecting behavioral data as a first party.
But they very much market. They sell that they are the privacy conscious.
I think they speak
business.
out of both sides of their mouth. I think they say that because it's good for business. But at the same time, if you're selling advertising, you're collecting ad data, right?
But
and that gets to a bigger issue. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Nate.
I was just to finish the point then, is that you can separate advertising. You can advertise effectively without compromising privacy. That is absolutely possible. And I think there is a big difference between selling something based on search terms and things and actively listening through a microphone to your device because you have allowed an app.
That is the extreme level. But I should tell you, Nate, go to the Dreamforce conference. This is Salesforce's conference. And literally every session is about, how do I collect more about people, know more about people, target more against people. There is, and I mean, there's like 1,000 sessions at this conference. It's enormous. There is nothing about protecting people's privacy. And I mean nothing.
Well, it is Salesforce. Let's be honest.
No, but I'm just saying, but think about this, Leo, for a second. Is the people responsible for collecting this information have zero incentive to protect your privacy. It is their incentive to collect as much as possible so they can be more efficient about the job that they're doing. And it makes sense.
And I hate to be... Go ahead.
Okay. No, I feel like I have to say, it's not like you're doing this for malicious reasons, right? Like,
no, they're just doing their job.
What I was going to say is, for my particular job, it's like I'm trying to, like, I'm working on a project right now in Ohio. right? So if I want to go figure out people who are not registered to vote, how do you figure out the inverse of the voter file? Right. Traditionally, the main data source that my party uses for this kind of stuff is literally going down to the circuit clerk's office, and every single Democrats have gone to every circuit clerk's office in the country, and they've gotten that voter file information. They know, what your address is, what party you're registered for, what elections you voted for. How do I get an inverse of that file to figure out who is not registered to vote, and then go, who would be someone who probably cares about these issues that we should try to get to register to vote? The traditional way is like going and sitting outside of a supermarket and pray you run into the right person. That's obviously crazy, right? So there are, it's not like you're sitting here going, I want to listen in on people and steal their information. Like, you're trying to figure out how to get messages to people. So there's just not going to be a moment where they're going to want anything less to do that job with, if that makes sense.
I mean, look, you're not selling soap, but it's the same stuff. You're selling something and you're getting the same kind of information. And it's very clear that people selling soap also want that information. I have to tell you, and this is kind of petty of me, but that's killing podcasting. Because true podcasting, RSS-based podcasting, doesn't have any of that information about its audience. And advertisers are fleeing from podcasting, just as they've fled magazines and newspapers, and they're fleeing network television because they can buy advertising that tells them exactly who's seeing it, when they saw it, for how long they saw it, who they are, what their demographics are. And advertisers want that information. Now, I think there's a lot of evidence, by the way, at least for advertising, not in politics. I think there's evidence to the contrary in politics, but for advertising, that it's not a very useful tool. But go ahead and try to tell advertisers that, they want that information and they're going to get that information. It makes it very hard for us to sell ads. They'll say, well, can you advertise to males in California? No, we don't have that information. That's not how it works. Spotify has that information. That's why Spotify exclusives cost. The advertising those podcasts costs Joe Rogan's $1 million a minute because he knows exactly who's watching and listening. So this is very
our
much
advertisers, by the way, they expect this. They assume that I'm going to get the names and email addresses of all the people.
You don't do that, right? Because you could.
I don't know. How the heck do I know?
How would I know that?
Listen to my podcast.
And you're talking to CISOs who are just like our audience, very sensitive to that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
That's, by the way, it's one of the reasons we had layoffs last week, and it's one of the reasons that we've canceled shows this week because the revenue's down dramatically. Advertisers are fleeing to the tune of $8 billion a quarter to YouTube, to places where they can get that kind of information. And so the model I built TWiT on 15 years ago is collapsing. That's why we push Club TWiT so hard.
Well, I think, by the way, digital advertising was selling getting more information than what Nielsen was telling you, prior.
Right. It's what's killed TV.
Yeah,
TV, you know what? There's a definite trend of advertisers moving to Google, Facebook, YouTube, places where they get that kind of information. And away from broadcast television, which even broadcast television knows more about you than we do. And by the way, why do you think so many TVs come with cameras built in nowadays? It's not so you can zoom from your TV.
I've seen it where there are ads built into the TV sets themselves, right?
Absolutely.
Like a separate screen or
try to turn that off on I don't know how it is in England, but here in the United States, you cannot buy a non-smart TV because they're putting ads on the screen. They're using cameras to watch who's watching.
Just don't connect it to to the internet. That's the first thing I tell people.
I agree.
I don't.
Then you'll get old ads that are not targeted, but you'll still get ads.
Thing is, ads are useful. Like, I'm not anti-ad or anti-advertiser.
No, we wouldn't exist without ads. Yeah.
It's the world works, and it's about like effective ads that aren't creepy, that don't exploit you. Like, that's all we need.
I agree.
And it's difficult. But that's basically all it is.
And I think what's happening, unfortunately, we had this notion that the internet was free for the last 20 years, and Gmail's free. It's free. Look at all the great free stuff I get through the internet. It was never free. And that model could not exist. It costs them a lot of money to provide Gmail. They have to show you ads.
The classic line, Leo, if you're not paying for the product, you are the product.
Right. And it's absolutely the truth. So ad-supported media is where I come from. I was in radio and TV for years, and I've been doing podcasts for 18 years. But honestly, the entire economic model of the internet is collapsing as we speak. And there's only two ways to pay for its stuff, is to either charge people, and people are subscription shy by this time, death by 1,000 subscriptions, or to somehow target you and get ads to you that advertisers will buy. And those are the incentives. So if you want to read a blog, if you want to listen to a podcast, if you want to watch a stream, all of that has to be paid for. And it's either you pay for it or the advertiser pays for it.
I was really interested that, just really, really quickly, I was really interested that Apple started doing this. It's this new subscription payment where it's contingent on you having a subscription to something else. Like if you subscribe to another app, you can give people a discount to subscribe to yours.
Oh, that's interesting.
I think maybe Google does this as well. I don't know, but it's an interesting idea because you don't have to be a subscriber to your company's app to offer the discount. Like you could say, well, if you're subscribed to such and such from this other company, then you can have a discount for this subscription because maybe they work well together. And it helps bolster the subscriptions of both to think, well, if you're keeping both of these subscriptions alive, then that's good for everyone. And I thought that's a really interesting idea. And how could that be applied in the wider world? And we do see that from the same companies, but not necessarily from different companies. And it comes down to data and who knows what else you're subscribing to.
I got an idea.
Its own question.
David, if people pay for our podcast and we give them a discount on your podcast, could you do the same to your podcast or your listeners on our podcast? That would be the same thing as Nate's talking about, right?
We do that, but I don't charge anybody for my podcast. No.
We have to push the club like crazy now because that's the only way we're going to survive, frankly.
But it's interesting you mentioned that, Leo, because
actually
years ago.
Go
ahead, jump in.
No, go ahead.
Hold that thought. Okay. Brianna, just pin it in there. Go ahead, David.
Okay.
No, David, then you. David, then Brianna.
Okay, I'll be very quick. Years ago, I wrote an article about making money from podcasting. And the bottom line is, and I'm sure you're going to confirm on this, there is no one stream. No, there's no one stream. Don't rely on any one stream. Yeah. You create a mixture thing. It could be merchandising. It could be getting sponsors. It could be paying for premium services, of which you're doing all of those things. Yeah. And there's lots more too as well. We are pretty much all supported by sponsors, but we do live events and we have other, other kind of live-based things as well that have become popular, but we're mostly sponsor-based. But again, you have to look for multiple models and you have to evolve too. Yeah. If the market changes, you got to evolve.
Brianna.
The show's moved on. Let's just keep going. I would be returning to something like 3
Return. I don't care.
No.
All right.
So, okay. I was going to say, this is coming back 3 points ago, but Leo, you were talking about basically criticizing the way the advertising has gone. And I agree with you. Like it's certainly different today than it was in the 90s. I think, how can I say this? I understand what you're saying there, but I also think it's true that the kinds of products that can get advertised today are fundamentally different than the things that had advertising budgets back in the 90s. Like, remember what this was like. It was major corporations. It was really big things. Small shops with these kinds of startup products, they didn't have access to, say, television or the newspaper, national newspapers in the exact same way. This is actually a relatively new thing, right? Do you remember when Facebook advertising came along? It was really unique that a small shop could go out there, like a local business could target people locally. This is a relatively new invention in advertising. So I hear what you're saying about being frustrating that the model has changed, but I also think fundamentally the kinds of people that are advertising are changed. We had one of our recent sponsors on Rocket is a small company doing like a buckwheat pillow, right? That's for people with a very special like sleeping preference, right? So I don't know. I think that the expectations are going, and I don't mean to minimize like the effect it's had on TWiT, but I think that it's not done out of malice. I think there's.
I'm not calling it malice. It's capitalism. It's it's the free market. It's the invisible hand. That's how they make more money. Listeners of this program get an ad-free version if they're members of Club TWiT. $7 a month gives you ad-free versions of all of our shows, plus membership in the Club TWiT Discord, a great clubhouse for TWiT listeners. And finally, the TWiT Plus feed with shows like Stacy's Book Club, The Untitled Linux Show, and more. Go to twit.tv/clubtwit, and thanks for your support.